Hey folks, about a week ago, apparently disaster hit. Iowa made trail cameras illegal. I received a text message from my buddy Andrew saying, "Did you hear that Iowa changed the rules on trail cameras? They're illegal." So I immediately jumped online, did my thing, did some research, started to see forums where people were discussing how it was going to affect them, whether they liked it, whether they didn't like it, what are they going to do moving in the future. Very interesting stuff. A couple of videos sporadically popped up talking about this new ruling, and it made me think about the late 80s, early 90s when this little thing came out called the trail timer. And I'll flash it on the screen here so you can see it if you don't know what it is. It was a very rudimentary piece, basically a stopwatch in the middle of a plastic holder that had a slot for a zip tie type piece of plastic that kept the clock running. And then a thread was attached, or a string was attached to that, which you mounted the timer on a tree and put that string across the trail. And when supposedly a deer animal came by, it would hit that string, pulling out the plastic zip tie and stopping the clock and giving you a date and a time when that deer tripped that string. And of course, what direction was the deer going? Was the direction of the string. Fast forward to now, and we have trail cameras with cellular capability, with video, with you name it, it'll do it. It'll do everything but feed the deer, apparently. And I remember thinking back then with the trail timer, wouldn't it be cool if we could put a camera up that somehow we could trip pictures? Well, that happened. Now states are outlawing it. So in an effort to help us all understand what those rules are, I reached out to a game warden, Dallas Davis. He handles the Appanoose and Monroe County areas in Iowa. And I asked him if he'd be willing to do an interview in order for all you folks to be able to hear directly from a conservation officer, game warden, on what the rules are. So without further ado, let's get into that interview. Very interesting stuff, and it definitely clears up exactly how this new cell cam law applies to you and me and everybody else out there that's going to be hunting on public property and private property. All right, folks, today we have Dallas Davis. He is a conservation officer / game warden for the state of Iowa. And he's in is that Appanoose County? Is that correct, Dallas?
I have Monroe and Appanoose County.
Okay.
Which is south central Iowa.
I had the opportunity last fall to have to call Dallas because somebody in front of me hit a deer and I wasn't sure how to handle it. So I found his name and called him. And the reason that we're talking today is, as most of you know, if you're watching this interview, you already have questions about the new Iowa trail camera, cellular camera ruling that has come down. For whatever reason, I asked Dallas if he would be willing to talk about this a little bit. It's obviously very new to him as well, so we'll do the best to answer questions that we can as we go here. And I've got some questions that he and I have actually previously discussed, and I'm just going to start with the real basic, simple question. Dallas, why did this come about? What was the inspiration for Iowa saying, okay, enough of the cellular camera thing?
Well, I mean, maybe we should clarify before we get too deep into it. It's not just a cellular camera deal. It's just trail cameras.
Okay.
And there's so many cell cameras now compared to regular cameras that it's easy to just say cell cams, but it does have to do with all trail cameras, and it just has to do with trail cameras on Iowa DNR wildlife management areas in state forest areas. So basically just lands that the Iowa DNR or the Natural Resource Commission has jurisdiction on. So there are some other public hunting lands in the state of Iowa that this would not impact it, unless they choose to make their own regulations.
For instance, around Rathbun, for instance, that's kind of broken up into different areas. Right. You guys control some of it, and who else controls that property over there?
The Corps of Engineers owns the majority of it, and then there's a large portion of it that we have under contract as a state wildlife management area. But there are still places that the Corps maintains, that are public hunting, that the Corps maintains their regulations and their management of. Generally speaking, the majority of the Corps of Engineers areas are up closer to the main lake and the eastern half of the main lake. As you get further west on the main lake, then there's a transition into the Iowa Department of Natural Resources managed lands, which would be considered our wildlife management areas where we're talking about on this deal. The easiest way in the field to determine those is our state lands are posted with green public hunting signs. The Corps of Engineers lands that are open to public hunting, they have a smaller white sign that designates that public hunting.
Okay. So throughout the state, the public areas, just to reiterate one more time, would be like wildlife management areas and state forest. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And this is any camera. It's not just cellular. It's also if you're going to go out and pull an SD card. Now, is the big question that I have is, what about pre-season scouting? So I think there was something I read somewhere about actively pursuing deer. I could be wrong, but maybe if you can clarify that. Is it okay to use the camera outside of deer season to take a survey of what you might be seeing coming up into the deer season, and then deer season the camera can't be there? What is the actual ruling there?
Okay, well, there's really nothing. It really has nothing to do with deer. It's just more. It actually has to do with leaving a camera or your personal property on the public wildlife management area. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have anything to do with deer, doesn't have anything to do with what season it is, doesn't have anything to do with whether you're hunting at the time or you're not hunting at the time. Honestly, I think it's more related to the management of people or hunters on the public land. It's not being done to deal with management of the deer or management of more trophy bucks or less trophy bucks or any of that. It's strictly related to the fact that it's public land, and it's about managing the people that are using the public land and what they're leaving on the property that's not authorized at this point anymore.
Well, that's a totally different perspective than what I think everybody thinks.
Yeah.
So it's really about, hey, we don't want your stuff hanging here all the time. It should be.
Well, that's what it's come to at this point. I mean, I think I don't know the infancy of it. If I recall correctly, we did have a case earlier, or maybe last year, that was related to a trail camera on one of our public areas. I don't remember the details of it. It may have had bait in front of it. I don't remember exactly, and I guess that's not the point, but because of that, this ball started rolling. Question came up as to the legalities of a person leaving a trail camera on a wildlife area to begin with, and whether that person had an expectation of privacy to that camera. It opened up a whole list of things, and ultimately I believe the department went to the Attorney General's office to get some guidance on some of the legalities related to, okay, if a person does leave a trail camera on a public area, one, is there an expectation of privacy for that person as to the contents in the camera or to the camera itself, if they just left it there without, in a public place? So there was the department reached out to some guidance on that. In that process, the Attorney General's opinion was that there's really nothing prescribed for people to leave cameras on our wildlife areas. Thus, it was recommended at this point that we just stop letting people, we're not going to allow people to continue to leave their property on the wildlife areas unless it's prescribed for in the administrative code that governs, like tree stands, for instance, and blinds, that sort of thing. If you go through the administrative code that deals with the management of our wildlife areas, there are things listed that you can leave on there, but it's regulated. There's rules that say if you have a temporary blind, like a temporary man-made blind, it has to be removed within an hour after sunset, and cannot be brought back or put back on the property until midnight, for instance. Tree stands, for instance, there's regulations that they can be brought onto the property and left, but only within certain time frames. Once you're outside of those time frames, then they can't be there anymore. The problem with the trail camera issue at this point is that it was recommended. It's not something that's allowed because it's not been a part of the administrative code to allow it.
Do you think there'll ever be an administrative
And where does
code
that stop when people start bringing things in to the public wildlife areas and leaving them? And it was basically recommended that that practice needs to stop, to allow people to just bring their own property and leave it unless it's provided for it already in the code or the administrative code.
So the question is now, obviously, do you think they'll ever put it in the administrative code that allows a time frame to have a camera on your, the state properties? Or at this point, is it just going to stay this way?
Well, obviously, what dictates what happens on land that's under the jurisdiction of the Natural Resource Commission and managed by the department as the representative of the Natural Resource Commission, that is a possibility that they could create rule, just like they have a rule for tree stands. They could create a rule that either says, no, we're not going to allow, we don't want the trail cameras on our wildlife areas, or maybe they do come up with a rule that says, okay, we will allow them, but it's going to be within certain guidelines and restrictions, and it will be administered in the administrative code. I don't know what's going to happen there.
In my scouting recently on a piece of public now, I can't say if it was wildlife management area or not, but it's definitely public land. There were just tree stands everywhere. This is March. Ladder stands, hanging stands. I'm going to assume that falls outside of this time period that you're talking about where you can have...
Yeah, it's 7 days after they have to be out 7 days after the final deer season.
If you see something like that, how does DNR handle that? How do you guys handle a situation where, you have public land and it's just loaded with these tree stands?
What I do is, because I have thousands of acres of public land in my territory, and I have a lot of deer hunting, and I have a lot of tree stands that I have to deal with on an annual basis. But if I find the tree stands in violation of the administrative code, either because they have something attached to them, they've screwed it to the tree, which is illegal, or they have left it there beyond the period where the administrative code allows them to be there, or before or after, then I will take them down and I will leave an orange tag there, letting that person know, because at this point we don't have anything that requires them to have a name or DNR customer number or anything, which is something that probably will come up in the future. I leave a tag to that unknown person with my name and phone number on it, and telling them to contact me immediately, that this tree stand has been seized because it was here unlawfully, and they can contact me as soon as possible, and we can get together. So, and sometimes they call, and sometimes they don't. So
yeah, that's kind of funny. We can get together,
but they're probably going to get cited if I'm in that situation. Because it's a lot of work to go out there and take them tree stands down, and it's kind of dangerous at times.
Where I've seen them, they're back off of the parking areas quite a ways, yeah. But there's one spot where I could easily tell you there's 10 stands all within.
Yeah, and and you've got my phone number, so after this is over, I appreciate. I have no problem taking that information and dealing with it.
Yeah, I gotcha.
They could be on core land too, I guess. There is a chance if you're around Rathman, they could be on core land.
Yeah.
That they manage, but we'll deal with that. You let me know and we can deal with it.
Okay. Going back to the cameras real quick, I just want to clarify. So, if you're a private landowner, you're still okay to use cameras on your property.
Yes, correct. This doesn't affect that at all. The other thing to clarify is there was not necessarily a law change. A lot of people think that there was a law change and it was snuck behind their back, and we just kind of did this back door and there was a law change. Technically, there was not a law change. There was an administrative decision made jointly with recommendation from the Attorney General's office that this is probably something you don't want to allow to continue at this time.
I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about also was you guys recently had a change in party hunting regulation in Iowa.
Yes, that was an actual, it can get a little complicated too, but it was actually a change in language within the administrative code that deals with tagging, transportation and tagging in the deer rule. The original intent of that section was always to not allow what I like to call it party tagging. It's a little bit easier to understand because if you use the word party hunting, people think that it's the act of hunting in a group. In this case, we're actually talking about the tagging of the deer. Nothing has changed as far as whether you can hunt in a group of people or not. The only part that has changed is that a non-resident is now required, and like I said, the language is always, the intent has always been this way, but the previous language that we had, what we've done is clarify it. because we've clarified it, we're much more confident in enforcing it compared to the language that was present prior to this clarification section. And basically that is that non-residents cannot party tag or party hunt if they are restricted to shooting the type of deer that their license is valid for, and they have to be they are the only person that can tag that deer. Another person, even a resident, cannot tag a non-resident's deer. If you have an antlerless tag, antlerless only tag, you can only shoot an antlerless deer, and nobody else can tag that deer for you. You have to physically be the one that tags it with your transportation tag. Some confusion with that as far as, people were complaining that, well, how come we can't party, or how come we can't hunt in a group anymore? Well, it's not about the group thing. It's just you shoot the deer, you tag it with your tag, and it has to be according to what type of license that you have.
This would also fall under like a non-resident that comes into Iowa can't shoot a deer on a resident's tag.
Correct.
Just to clarify, just so everybody understands. So basically what you guys are saying is, hey, you're a non-resident, you have to have your own license, your own tag, and you have to shoot the deer on your license and tag, and nobody else can. It's you and your tag only, just like any normal situation in any state that you go hunt.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. There might be another state that has customarily had some sort of party tagging, that they allowed. Somebody told me Minnesota did, but I don't know that myself. I thought Iowa was the only lonesome state that still allowed people to tag something that I shot, or every place else you got to tag what you with your own license.
Gotcha, but residents can still do the party
at this
hunting.
Time residents,
tag.
yeah, and that's, like I said, it's not because before, what we did was make some clarification, and the intention is remain the same. It was not enforced previous to this clarification in the rule because there was concerns as to the way it was written. Was it enforceable? And of course, if there's something that's wishy-washy, we try not to go there. Nobody wants to file a charge and lose it. And so if there's something that's a little bit on the wishy-washy side, it's better off that you just let it roll. When Chapter 106, what also happened, which kind of was the precursor to this having the opportunity to deal with this, there was a executive order that came out, I think a year, maybe 2 years ago, from the governor's office. And that executive order was a mandate to all of the agencies that have administrative code, which the Iowa DNR is one of those agencies. The intention of that executive order was to go through your administrative code sections, eliminate things that is not needed, merge things that can be merged, clarify things that can, basically it was, if we have things that we don't need anymore, that was the intent, was to downsize regulation. So in that process, each department was required to go through all of their administrative code and sort through it. And prior to this change, the non-resident rule was separate. It was Chapter 96, if I remember correctly, and the resident rule was Chapter 106. So there was an administrative code for resident deer hunting, and there was another administrative code for non-resident deer hunting. So under the mandate of this executive order, logically, they took those two administrative codes, got rid of one, took two and made one. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does.
And in that process, that kind of opens the door to go through those things and clean up areas that may be a little ambiguous, and that's basically what happened here. They clarified the writing that dealt with residents and non-residents party tagging. So
that makes a lot of sense.
There's a lot of people that like it, and there's some people that don't like it, which is, that's pretty common with about everything.
That's right. Go out on the internet, read any forum, go to any social media, and you're going to find the haters and lovers of everything. So, but it's
so I don't
interesting.
know if that clears that up for you or not, but it
does. I think it clears it up completely. And one of the things that has been great about asking you these questions is the fact that all of the speculation that I've seen on different forums and people talking about this, it's unbelievable the wild, crazy spectrum of ideas that people have, and the fact that they're like, oh, you can't you can't do this and you can't do that, and we can't have them on private property, and how are we going to fight this? We're going to fight it by saying that, we're looking for trespassers. We're looking at our crops, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, hold on. Nobody has clarified any of this. Nobody knows what they're talking about, which is why I asked you to do this, because I'm hoping we can bring some semblance of understanding and calm this thing down a little bit.
Yeah, I hope we can get that done here today. So
I think we will. I think this information is good enough, and people are going to want to watch it and listen to what you have to say. I am kind of curious from your perspective. I am kind of curious what your thoughts are about modern technology and where we're headed with hunting, and what you might foresee in the future as being problematic, and departments looking at and saying, okay, let's get ahead of this curve because technology is moving so quickly, how that's going to affect rules in the future, and what kind of things you guys are worried about.
Well, unfortunately, our process is very slow. In our rule and lawmaking process, to get ahead of some of those things you might be thinking of is very slow, and it's hard. It's hard to get things changed. Fortunately, for things like, for instance, like drones and that sort of thing, which is maybe something in the line of what you're talking about. We had a previous aircraft hunting by aircraft regulation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had any, drones are obviously something that nobody was thinking about when they were creating the majority of the fish and game laws. But we had an aircraft law that made it illegal to hunt with aircrafts in Iowa. Fortunately, we were able to wheel that just applied. The other thing that's kind of techie wise is we don't allow hunting with radios in the state of Iowa, except for coyotes outside of the regular deer season. And that brings in the whole cellular communication, is technically radio communication and all that stuff. The only thing that applies to any of that cellular stuff in our laws is previous laws that we already had that dealt with hunting with radios. In that case, it requires that person that's using the radio be actively hunting at the time. There's some states that may have other regulations that deal with cellular communications that we don't have. There's always a constant battle to keep up with the newest trends of technology, and then make decisions on whether it's something that should be allowed or not allowed based on fair chase or ethics or moral reasons.
It's interesting that I never really thought about that, bringing up the radio thing during deer season. Well, everybody in the deer stand's got a phone.
Yeah.
And we all text back and forth.
It's not unlawful to have that, and it's not unlawful to use it. It's just, our law makes it illegal to communicate a couple things. Communicate the location of game through the use of a radio or radio wave. To coordinate the movement of hunters. So if you're doing everything else, you're fine. But if you cannot communicate the location of game, and you cannot coordinate the movement of hunters with the use of radios, which would technically include cellular phones or cellular transmission.
I think there are an awful lot of people out there that are innocently saying to their buddy, texting, there's a huge buck over here, he's coming your way.
Yeah.
And they've just broken a law.
Potential. And you got to understand, and that's one of the things like we were talking, what started this conversation is that law was created before cellular phones were even invented.
Right, of course.
That law was created for true, like CB, citizen band radios.
Right.
And it probably was, I wouldn't have been around then or paying attention at that point, but it was probably had to do with group hunting, to be honest with you. We combated that for years, and some places of the state still do, and that is hunting in groups with trucks and radios, hollering at each other where the deer are or whatever it may be. And so that was probably what started those things, was group hunting in itself.
It's an interesting conundrum because cellular technology is way more advanced than the CB radio ever was, and people can go, 5 buddies can go out in the woods and be in tree stands during bow season and be constantly communicating with each other about sighting game. Oh, it's heading your way. It's, it's 100 yards from me, but going down your direction. And, so I see a conundrum there. Like the way the law is written definitely says that, hey, you're not supposed to do that, technically, right?
And it would be terribly difficult. It'd be terribly difficult to enforce that.
Yeah.
And that's why fishing game laws sometimes very difficult or different than a lot of law. The laws are created for management of the wildlife, majority of them. Some of them are for safety purposes, but the majority of it is strictly dealing with the successful management of the wildlife.
Right.
And a little bit of it is management of people. Obviously, when you're talking about public land usage, you got to have, if you turn 100 people loose in 5,000 acres, you got to have some way to regulate what they can and can't do. And it creates some laws that are very difficult to enforce. But back when all we had was CB radios or other walkie-talkie type radios, we had scanners, and we could pick those conversations up if we needed to. But now that it's cellular, it's very difficult to deal with that if that was going on, and it's maybe wasn't really created for that purpose, originally, but
Right.
the law's still there.
I can just imagine back then, listening to the scanner. Yeah, rubber ducky, you've got a big tender down there, a 9 to 5 copy.
You're not too far off. But
I bet that was kind of funny. I'm looking at my list here and the stuff that we said. You covered so much of this. I don't really think there's anything else. I think you clarified and did a wonderful job, and I can't thank you enough for doing this. And I sure hope that this goes viral and everybody can calm down and get their head wrapped around what you guys are doing here and why, and not being so worked up about it. If there's anything you want to add, I'm all ears.
No, hopefully it'll stop my phone from ringing so much.
It's burning up. It's like phone's. You probably
It's
I called
not been
you.
too bad. It's not been too bad. But the thing about it is, I guess I do appreciate people that call me and want to clarify the information rather than rely on what they hear at work or what they see on the internet, or that. Whenever I do hunter safety courses at the end, that's one thing that we always are trying to make sure that we tell them kids is that there's a lot of regulations. You're not going to remember all this today, but our phone numbers are in the back of that book, and make the phone call. We can get you the right information before you go out there. We would much rather deal with visiting with you over the phone or in person at the convenience store or whatever it may be, than to have to deal with you in a law enforcement setting where somebody's violated the law and may have to deal with it in a different way. We'd much rather talk about it and get you the right information ahead of time.
Right.
So, any day I can go out and check a bunch of hunters and I don't have to write a ticket is supposed to be a good day for everybody.
Right.
So,
Well, I know I appreciate what you guys do a whole lot. Everybody that I know wants to do it right and wants to understand what the rules are, and
yeah.
Be able to work within the parameters they're supposed to. I mean, in my opinion, if you're a real outdoorsman, you're a real hunter, fisherman, whatever, you value the resource and you want to protect it. We're an extension of what you guys do, and we should be working together. That's how I look at it.
Yep, that's for sure.
Well, Dallas, thank you so much for taking the time from your truck today in beautiful Iowa and explaining all of this to us. And let all your friends know that you're now a YouTube star. And
there you go. Something I always wanted to be, I'm sure.
That's right. And have them watch your video and share your video, and let's get this information out there. And I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Have a good one, Dallas. Thanks so much.
You bet. Take care.
Hope you got as much out of the interview as I did with Dallas. It definitely clears up the new trail camera law in Iowa. Do me a favor, guys. If you got something out of the video, enjoyed it, please subscribe, smash the like button, hit that bell. We're just getting this channel fired up. We could use all the help we can get with you guys who are viewing this right now. We'd love to have you on the journey as we continue to grow the content that we're bringing to you here, and we hope you have a great day. Take care.